here at Governor State University, and we're privileged to have Dr. Rony Berger with us today. He is a member of the Faculty of Emergency Medicine at Ben-Gurion University and on the faculty of the Stress, Crisis, and Trauma program at Tel Aviv University. He is an internationally recognized clinical psychologist and a family and child therapist who specializes in dealing with the psychological preparation for and aftermath of terrorism and other disasters. Dr. Berger established and directed community services at Natal, the Israeli Trauma Center, between 1999 and 2010, where he designed community programs in the aftermath of war and terror and trained thousands of professionals in treating trauma survivors and their families. From 1997 to 2000, Dr. Berger was visiting professor of psychology and behavioral medicine at Al-Quds University, where he taught medical and graduate students and co-directed the Palestinian Center for Traumatic Stress Studies. Additionally, he served as a senior researcher at the Harry Truman Center for the Advancement of Peace at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. In training professionals and in leading emergency relief and medical teams, Dr. Berger has been involved in many major disaster recovery efforts, including the aftermath of Oklahoma City, the attacks on 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, the tsunami in Asia, the terror attacks in Sri Lanka and Thailand, and the earthquakes in Turkey, Indonesia, China, Samoa, and most recently in Haiti and New Zealand. Dr. Berger is the editor of the book Preventive Approaches in Couples Therapy and numerous manuscripts and journal articles, including Parents and Children in the Shadow of Terror and Transcending Trauma, a Mind-Body Self-Healing Approach, and the upcoming book, Heroic Transformations, How to Transform Hate and Revenge into Compassion and Reconciliation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rony Berger to Governor State University.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, the Governor State University, for inviting me, and the Division of Psychology and Counseling, and the Division of Visual Arts and Performing Art. Let me do it right. Communication, Visual, and Performing Arts. All right. Today I'm going to do something, I'm going to rush. I'm going to have 3 lectures in one. I'm going to talk about healing communities in the aftermath of the disaster. That's one topic. I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can heal and change communities that were going through strife and terrorism and move them into a more peaceful reconciliation position. And I'm going to talk about a little bit de-radicalization program that has to do with terrorism, and I'm going to do it condensedly. So I'm going to try to do it fast, and if I go too fast, just let me know. The other thing that I want to start by is saying that while I'm talking about, I'm from Israel, so I will talk about war and terrorism, but it applies to different kind of trauma, inner city trauma like the gangs that you have in Chicago and I work with in LA and East Oakland, in San Francisco, the Bay Area, and also some of the things that I'll say will be related to Israelis. I don't know if there are Palestinians around, but my concern are in both societies. I've worked, as you heard, in a Palestinian university, so while I'm representing the Israeli side, there's clearly some concern about what's happening to children and adults on the other side. And while I won't talk about it, it's in my mind, and certainly I am concerned about that. So without ado, let me start by, this is a trip to Haiti, which I'll go pretty soon. And I want to talk about what happened to individuals who experienced trauma. And by the way, this is applicable also to domestic violence, sexual abuse, etc. So in some ways, if you understand the phenomenology of trauma, you can understand what to do thereafter, either clinically or community-wise. So what happened to people who undergo trauma? The first thing that happened is there is a severance of the illusion of safety. If you didn't know that, we all live in an illusion of safety, that what will happen today will happen tomorrow and things will be okay. But the fact of the matter that some of us, as they will go home, will perhaps, and God forbid, hit a truck and won't be among us. There are some people who have different kind of diseases, and we don't really seem to be cognizant of that. The fact of the matter is, if that happened to us, our neighbor, we see some accident, there is a bomb falling around us, terror 9/11, all of a sudden, what happened is that we sense what Robert Lifton called the traces of death gets to our soul. That is to say, we are aware that we are temporary here. And when that happened, there is a slew of feeling emerging from a sense of chaos, shock, confusion, etc., etc. And what I'd like to do today is I want to show you a few pictures from drawings around the world of kids that have gone through really tough experiences. In Israel, terror; in Sri Lanka, the tsunami, Katrina, the floods there. And the reason I show kids drawing is very often they're less defended than us adults. And you can see what's happening there. And so I can demonstrate some of the experiences, subjective experiences that they have. Now, the other thing that happens is when we experience a traumatic event, there are changes not only affectively, emotionally, as I pointed before, but also cognitively. And some of the changes are in the perception of the world. We see the world as unpredictable, unsafe, uncontrollable, dangerous. That is the day after we have that sense in ourselves. We also see others, particularly if it relates to interpersonal violence or war, not natural disaster, as being dangerous, and we start to get paranoid and start to be careful about others. It changes our perception of ourselves, particularly those victims who were exposed to terror. They may not be themselves hurt, but the fact that they have seen it and they have been under distress, they make themselves feel more vulnerable, mortal. And sometimes they have a victim mentality. So they sort of inhabit that identity. And the last part that happened, I'm not used to that, okay? The last part that happened is there is a change in the perception of the future. We look at the future differently. The future seemed to be more green, more pessimistic. I done more research with Palestinian kids, and I asked them, well, what are you going to be when you be older? And the answer that I got, well, I want to have a boat. I want to have a house. Because they couldn't see past their here and now present. They couldn't see themselves as superheroes, as most kids in this culture would answer that question. And the reality is that if you are in a survival mode, you're not going to look at the future and think how future is important to all of us. We plan our vacation, etc. So future is very important, and the future is cut, those who are exposed to traumatic events. And the basic stuff is that I will never feel safe. The sense of safety is being shattered. Now, if you want to have one goal in therapy for traumatized people, is to gain back the sense of safety. If you did it, all the other symptoms, and there are many clinical symptoms, DSM type of thing, could go away. But this is the sense. If they can gain back the sense of trust and safety, they're okay. Let me show you some picture around that. This is a picture of a Palestinian. I always like to start with Palestinian, just to point out that we are not the Israelis, the victim. This is an 8-year-old Palestinian boy from Gaza who says, this is what I see almost every night before I fall asleep, and this is what he draws. And you can sense the chaotic experience that he has, and you ask yourself, well, if this is what he sees in his dream, what happened in reality? How can he function with that kind of inner life? I'll show you a 13-year-old Israeli girl who was in a suicidal bomb incident with her family and lost her brother. And she said, I was totally shocked, confused after my brother was murdered. Now, you don't have to be a great psychologist to figure out that she had gone through tremendous shock. You see just the face. But notice how she smeared all sign of life. The flowers, the hearts, the sun. And the other thing that is very interesting, and it's a symbol that we see very often, is the clock there. And what happened is that their sense, people who are victimized or terrorized, their sense of timing got stuck. So the part of them live in the here and now, and part of them get stuck in the past. From there, you have all the symptoms like flashbacks and all the other things. It's as if they live in dual reality. Okay, let's go further. This is a wonderful drawing of a 9-year-old Indonesian boy in Aceh in Thailand. And this is after the tsunami, and he lost his family. And this is the way he expressed himself. He said, this is a very, very mad sea. and it could be a museum piece, but just want to show you the expressiveness of the kid. Just manifest his emotion. Depression. This is a 16-year-old girl who lost her mom in a shooting incident in the West Bank. And she says, well, life stopped when mother died. I didn't know what to do and who to turn into, and this is what she drew. And you can sense the feeling of depletion within the picture. And this is, in Hebrew, mom, big words for mom, which is crying out loud, mom. And again, pay attention to the symbol of stoppage. Here she represented as a red light, and it's as if light or life has stopped for her. All right, whoops. This is a 7-year-old boy from New Orleans. We escaped to the roof and felt frightened, as you recall. In New Orleans, by the way, we were one of the first delegation. It was very funny because the United States, by the time they came, and Bush, when he came, there were many, many trucks, but they came about 2 weeks after the disaster. The Israelis came about 2 days after the disaster. I just wonder how the administration worked with disaster. By the time they mobilized all the big trucks, half people were God knows where. But anyway, be it as it may, this is a little boy. And just pay attention to the intensity of his drawing. This is Crayola. So he goes, and that sense of tension you can see here in the picture. I had another tsunami picture that looked very similar. So just a sense of helplessness, the fright that kids have. Now this is a wonderful picture of a 17-year-old adolescent who were exposed to a terror attack, a suicide bomb in a bus in Israel, and she wasn't even close to that. But there was a period where there was a lot of terror attacks in Israel, almost daily. And she looked at it and something triggered in her. She went back home. She didn't tell anybody, but she was totally shattered by the experience. Now, she was a very smart kid, so she was functioning very well, and you wouldn't know that she was upset. And that's very often what we see with people who are exposed to disasters. You don't know externally that they're upset, but I want you to pay attention to her drawing. Since she was an art major, in school I asked her to draw a self-portrait, and this is what she drew. It's pretty good, huh? And this is the mixture feeling that I was talking about in the beginning. You can see here everything. You can see here a sense of terror, a sense of anger, sense of fright, and shuddering, fragmentation. Very often we see in people fragmentation. Women, there is a sign. I'm asking the women, not the men. There is a sign, there is a prognostic sign, a good sign here, which is what? Come on. What is the good sign in the picture? The what? A lipstick. At least she maintained her sexuality, and it's there. So this is a good sign. That's good. She looks a lot different this day. If she drew her painting today, she would look differently after therapy. All right. This is a 16-year-old girl in a Druze village in the Galilee in the Lebanon war. And she said, when we took shelter, I felt like we will not have a good future here in Israel. And this is what she drew. And you sense the sense of heaviness that this girl has. It's very demonstrative of people whose futures start to shift and change. All right, so this is just a way to bring you some sense of what people's subjective experience is like. Let's move into what happens on different levels to the community. I'd like to talk about 5 impacts. First, the biological level. Secondly, the psychological level. Then we talk about the family level. Because people who are exposed to trauma, or society that is exposed to trauma, the family changes, the relationship within the family changes. Then there is a community level, the community change. And I will talk about that a little bit. Then there is socio-political changes and moral changes. Now, I won't talk about everything because I don't have the time, but I'll focus first on the biological. And the reason I do that is because very few people talk about the psychological impact on the body. We know about it, but there's little data. So let me show you a few examples. And my question is, exposure to highly stressful situation present a public health risk. So we know that Holocaust survivors in Israel, for example, when they were exposed to the war, they seemed to develop more illnesses than the regular public. There is a history of tension that exposed them to more problems. We know from studies that high victimization, people who were victimized, were robbed, seem to develop more problems. They go more for a health visit to GPs. Now, this is more direct. Even this is a study in Lebanon, and what they found out that people who lived in the side where there is the civil war and were exposed to a lot of bombing, the life expectancy drew down. In other words, they died earlier. Women died earlier 3 times. Let me see. Men dies twice as earlier as the other man, and women 3.5. So there is a significant impact on the way in which the body reacts to stress. This is a more direct study in Croatia where we actually looked, they looked at what happened to people who were exposed to the war, and they see reduced immunological functioning. So you can see there a causal relationship. You're not just getting sick because of stress, you're getting sick because your immune system doesn't function as well, and then you get sick. And we did, the last study is a prospective study that we did, and we looked at a town that you'll see in the movie. In Sderot, there is a town, in Israel, there is a town that is called Sderot. It's in South Israel. And they are continually bombarded by missiles from Gaza by the Palestinians. Some of you may know it, some of you may not. So we looked at what happened to the people there. And what we found out is that eventually, people who were living in that area versus another area that weren't under fire, people use a lot more doctor visits, 3 times more. And when we factor out, socioeconomics, that is, we compare them to a group of people who weren't in this higher socioeconomics, they used it 15 times more. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is, if you are under tremendous stress, be it a disaster, terror, or war, and you're poor, you're in bad shape. And that is a very important message for me to say, because I feel that very often central government abdicate their responsibility for the poor. Think about New Orleans and the poor there. Think about Israel when the government didn't really help the people in the Galilee who were periphery, also poor. So very often the poor get the brunt of it. And I think this is important, particularly in this election. This is an election message. So yes, my message is yes, there is a problem with public health, and we need to consider that. Let's look at the psychological impact. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but we do know that various psychological problems, behavioral problems, psychiatric problem, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, suicidal rate, is very often happens after exposure to war and terror or to major disasters. Let me show you some statistics and some prototypical thing. This is a meta-analysis, but I won't get into high statistics. Simply, there are 4 types of responses to people after a disaster. You can develop symptoms and not function right after the disaster and stay with it. This is the first pattern. This is a chronic pattern. Okay? You have a problem here, you start to dysfunction, and the functioning does not improve. 1. Second, you can have what we call a recovery. You have symptoms in the beginning, first few days, first few weeks, and with time, you return back to normal functioning. The third is the delayed response, the strong line. And the delayed response is you look okay in the beginning, and then with time, when you experience other stresses, your functioning start to deplete and you're not functioning well. And the last one, my favorite, is when you're resilient. You don't have problem right after, you don't have problem right, after years, you're okay. I often ask people, and since we don't have time, I want to ask you, what do you assume the ratio of this kind of responses are? So when you ask clinical psychologists and you ask psychiatrists, they usually exaggerate into pathology. They see a lot more people in the chronic state or in the delayed state. But the truth of the matter is, we're doing fairly well after disaster. So the first line, we have 5 to 15% people that are exposed to major disaster develop really strong symptomatic stuff and do not function well. Most of the people, however, are faring pretty well. The ones that are recover are between 50 to 75%. Don't do the math because it's complicated. And very few people have a delayed response, and some people, about 20%, 15 to 20%, are okay. And this is another thing, sometimes people, when I go to towns that are bombarded, ask me, listen, I have a kid that we're seeing all of this. Will he have a problem? Is he scratched? I'm translated from Hebrew. Mentally scratched? And I say, no. Some people are resilient. They don't develop any stress. So just be aware that some people are okay, And it is a temperament. It's probably not just psychology, that is good parenting and all that. It is related, but it's also temperament. In other words, you're born with resilience, some of you. All right. So the good news is that most of us are okay. After a disaster, a few weeks, months into that, we are doing well. And the bad news is that some of us are stuck between 5 to 15%, as I pointed out. Now, the dilemma is that we don't know who are the people who get stuck. So let's say there is a bomb falling right here. Then I assume, 30 here, 20 here, that about 5 to 15% of you will develop post-traumatic stress and some symptoms, or you won't function days and months after the event. Now, would I know who are the ones? Not really. When you do a preparedness program, you might as well figure what population are at risk. So the first 3 factors relates to the situation. When he did studies in New York City after 9/11, when we went down to Tribeca, the area by the towers, we got 20% people after weeks that developed symptoms. When you went further to New York State, you already have 12%. And as you go further, you have less and less. So geographic distance is a factor. It also relates to how close you are to the people who are affected. When you're closer, family and you're going to be more affected. And if you have life history, threatening event in the past, you have trauma in the past, you are more exposed. And also the way you interpret reality, if you perceive it as a personal threat, you're going to be more inclined to develop symptoms. So this is the first set of factors. The next set of factors is more demographic. Well, let's talk about that, and we'll do it briefly. Gender. Now, in all research in psychology and psychiatry, female are represented twice as much as male in all symptoms. Also PTSD, post-traumatic stress. Question is, are they more vulnerable creature? And some men will say yes, and I'll say no, they're smarter because they report that they have problem and we die. So that's the difference between us and you. And you have oxytocin, which is this nice, hormone that gets you connected to people, and we don't have it. We have testosterone, so we are, yeah, that's the problem. So anyway, my point is, and I was studied in Israel, we have women representing post-traumatic symptoms 4 times. And by the way, the question is why, and the answer, I'm doing it fast. And the answer is because we are a closed society, and the females are more interested in children, and the type of threats that we have are family's threat, because bombs don't know. It's not like soldiers that go into war. The war was within town, so women were more exposed because they took care of the kids. They called the children and say, "Oh, are they okay? Are they in the mall? I heard there was a bomb." So they're more inclined to develop symptoms, 4 times more than male in Israel. And then we have low income, low education, immigration, ethnic minorities, and lack of social support. All of that you can put in one factor, and that is lack of resources. And this is really very important. And to me, it's very important to say that when a society is exposed to trauma, disaster, or terror, we need to take for the poor one, for the disabled one, for the ones who do not have resources. And oftentimes, as I said before, this doesn't happen. All right, second, this is also interesting. This is lately we found in our research that it's the relationship between leadership and the community and between the citizens. When you perceive your leadership to be not there, not effective, you are more threatened and you develop more symptoms. So, Giuliani did a great job after 9/11. He came out with the leader, strong, he was on the scene, and he apparently was doing the right thing. So that helps the society. And the last factors are personality factor. Now, those of you who are clinical psychologists would be anxious to know that many years we didn't have any signs of personality, although intuitively you would think that those who are more vulnerable will have more symptoms. Well, we now know that attachment is an issue. Those who are less securely attached are more likely to develop symptoms when they are exposed to stress. And we know that people who are more optimistic fare better. So there are some personality factors, but they are not the major factor. The major factor is situational, in fact. So how do we prepare? What do we do? So this is a model that we developed in Israel, and I'm going to talk about the case example of this town that was bombarded for 7 years, and you will see what it means, because you'll see what it is to run for shelter. You have 20 seconds to run for shelter. Just imagine there was now an alarm, and we all have to rush 20 minutes. Now, you don't know where your kids are, and if they are close to a shelter, so it's a crazy type of living. Very, very stressful. So what do we look at when we look at a community after a disaster? We want to look at the multi-level. We want to treat individual, but we don't want to forget families. We don't want to forget communities, and we don't want to forget the nation. So we do have to look at different levels and develop community-based program on all this level. We want to look at prevention because we don't want just to treat those who have symptoms. We want to do primary prevention, which is before the symptoms get though. We do a lot of school-based program, and we want to catch them before they develop the symptoms. The other approach that we are using is salutogenic approach, which is focusing on the health side and on the strength side, not on the pathology. Very often, after a disaster, you have all this clinician coming. Well, you don't need clinician. Many times, people in the community doing better job than we clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. So the focus is on strengthening skills and abilities, and we focus our approach. Well, this is not new, holistic. We look at the body, we work on the psyche, and we work on the spiritual also, some religious ceremonies, etc. And this is really important because very often when I go around the world, different community, they don't do proactive approach. They wait till people will come or develop symptoms, and we go to places, and we ask people, and we interview people, and we gather them in groups and do some work. So I want to show you the work we did in Sderot, this town. And we did the treatment not in the clinics, but we went from the clinic and we did it at home. And I want to show you how it looks and what it looks like working under fire. So let's roll the videotape. This is like an anchor in New York in sports. Let's roll the videotape.
בסוף היום מצאנו את המקום הזה. למעלה עדיין טרטרו המסוקים, אבל על הקרקע בקיבוץ נרעם שולט השקט. הודו הקטנה. לא מזמן פתחו אותה, מסעדה הודית שמשקיפה על החוף של עזה ועל הגגות האדומים של שדרות.
יש משקיעות מדהימות. כן.
הם בשנתי. ברקע האזעקה, שמיד אחריה כבר למדנו, מגיעה תמיד נפילה.
רואה את הרוסית,
כשירדנו בתחילת השבוע דרומה, הכוונה הייתה לצלם סיפור על חיים בצל הקסאם. גם היה לנו גיבור. קוראים לו דוקטור רוני ברגר, פסיכולוג קליני, מומחה לפוסט-טראומה.
שקט היה היום?
הוא כבר היה באסון התאומים, בהוריקן קטרינה, בצונאמי, אל אזור האסון שקרוי שדרות ומגיע פעם בשבוע. נותן למשפחות קבועות טיפולי תחזוקה.
תקריא עליי. מחזיקה
פתח עיניים. יפה.
סגור עיניים.
מקום שאתה מרגיש בו שלב, בטוח. עלה את התמונה.
בין עזה לתחנת הכוח באשקלון, חוף זיקים. מקום מפלט לתושבי שדרות והסביבה. הקסאמים לא נוחתים כאן, הם ממשיכים בדרך כלל צפונה. אפשר להשתזף פה בלי דאגה.
גם אתם פה מתנהגים בחוף כאילו שגרה.
שגרה? 7 שנים אותו דבר, מה זה לא שגרה?
בוא נעשה את זה.
בפינת הסלון בביתם הלא ממוגן בנתה משפחת ססון את כלוב המתכת הזה. לכאן הם נמלטים בכל הזקה.
מה עושים שכנים שלך שאין להם כזה?
מה הם עושים עם זקנים? אני לא מקנה בהם.
היי בנות, מה נשמע?
ביקרנו גם אצל השכנים, אצל שביט וחברותיה, שרוני ניסה להפנט בלי הרבה הצלחה.
חזרה אל סגרו עיניים. תפתח את העיניים ותחזור אל הגינה.
ואז גמרנו לצלם. יום שלישי, 6 בערב, בדרך החוצה משדרות.
זה ממש קרוב. זה ממש קרוב. זה כבר קרוב היה ממש. זה שתי קסמים.
אחרי הבום אפשר להירגע. זה לא אנחנו. אם זה לא אנחנו, זה כבר לא יכול להיות אסון.
אבל דווקא טוב.
קורא לך הרבה פה? קורא לך הרבה? כן?
כן.
עכשיו שם המשחק הוא איפה נפל. המשחק הכי ציני בשדרות. כל העיר משתתפת, ובעיר קטנה מוצאים מהר מאוד.
טלי, תשמע, הוא מתפלל. שם, מופיע טונה השחורה.
כן, מה קורה? עלת בספר גיל? אוקיי, בסדר. הנה, טוב.
דקות אחרי הנפילה הזירה כבר מלאה. אלה לא המראות שהתרגלנו לראות בצפון בקיץ האחרון. כאן הרחובות מלאים. רק מעטים עזבו.
מה?
מה פסיכולוג יכול לעשות כאן? מעט מאוד. אלה הדקות של אנשי העזרה הראשונה.
תצלם, זה מה שרצה אולמרט.
השעות שלו יתחילו מאוחר יותר וימשכו חודשים ושנים אחרי. אחרי שכבר הכל כביכול חזר לשגרה.
יש לנו התראה על ירי נוסף. תכניסו את הילדים לבתים, אתם עומדים באותו מקום. כשנפלתם, תיכנסו לבתים.
הבית ממול הוא מזהה, צריכים אותו.
הביאו לילדים פסיכולוגים, אלה שהיו בחוץ.
האמא שולחת אותו אל הילדים ששהו בחצר בזמן הנפילה.
חבר'ה, איך אתם מרגישים? אתם בסדר? מה קורה? על העץ?
טוב, בסדר, עליו פש, עליו פש.
הנה, בבקשה. בוא קצור.
See everybody has to run to shelter.
צבע אדום. מה?
עכשיו הוא מבין, הבעיה הדחופה בבית היא לא הילדים.
אני לא גוף לראות. אתן קשורות אליה? אתן קשורות אליה או לא? הייתי אומר שאת קשורה אליה. איך את? בסדר? קצת תפחיד. אוקיי. דופק של אחרי העצימה. סימה?
צריכה להירגע. את רוצה לדבר איתנו?
לא, היא לא שם, היא לא שם. היא לא שם.
הבן הצעיר שלה מתקרב, מחפש הסברים.
הנה.
אני אגיד לך מה קורה לה? היא קצת... היא בסדר גמור, היא נושמת והכל בסדר איתה, היא קצת רק בהלם. היא תחזור לעצמה מהר מאוד.
רוני מחליט לפנות אותה לבית החולים. הלילה המתוח שצפוי להם כאן לא בריא לנפגעי חרדה.
אתה רוצה להסתכל? בוא הנה, בוא נשב כאן. אתה יודע מה קורה כשאנשים מתעלפים? הם לא מתים. לא, אל תדאג. תסתכל עליי. הם לא מתים בכלל. אתה יודע מה קורה? הם כאילו לא מדברים, אבל לאט לאט הם חוזרים לעצמם, והכל יהיה בסדר. אני לא אומר לך את זה סתם, כי ראיתי הרבה אנשים כאלה.
בבקשה להיכנס לבתים.
אנחנו בדרך לאתר הנפילה הבא. רוני ושתי פסיכולוגיות שמגיעות איתו לסדרות פעם בשבוע מתל אביב.
הנה פה, מה זה פה?
סדרות עכשיו בקאוס. היא נראית שלווה, אבל מכל כיוון זורמים דיווחים על נפגעי חרדה. אחד הילדים מזהה את רוני. הוא מכיר אותו מביקוריו הרבים בעיר.
אמא של אליאב? כן. אליאב!
אליאב פה, אליאב פה,
אליאב!
אליאב בוא איתי, אליאב. אליאב בוא איתי. לא יודע.
סתם התעלפה כאן?
לא, היא מכל דבר.
אני בא מפה!
אליאב! בוא רגע, בוא.
עוד אמא מפונה לבית החולים. הבן נשאר מאחור. אני מחכה לו בבית, לך תדע. רחוב הנחלים, הזירה הבאה, כולם כבר כאן.
איפה היית כשזה קרה?
בתוך הבית ראיתי את השריקה. ראיתי כבר...
כולכם שמאלנים, אתה והשיגול והצבא שלך.
כן.
על השולחן בסלון רמזים למי שישב כאן לפני הפגיעה. עכשיו הבית הזה הוא עניין ציבורי, נחלת כולם.
By the way, the woman that you had seen is a shock reaction. You can react with a lot of anxiety and fear. You can react with anger, you're shouting, fight or flight. But the worst thing is freeze. When you're freezing, you have more chances for the symptom to take a longer time to recover. So those who are freezing, and she was totally frozen, she fainted in fact, seem to be in the worst shape. But let's go further. Can I transfer? I want to talk about so this was the biological and the psychological impact, and I want to talk a little bit about the political factors and the socio-political factors. What I notice is that when people are exposed on an ongoing basis to that, they develop what I call, this is not an English word, but hey, what the heck, I can do it, cocoonization, meaning being in a cocoon. They sort of shelter themselves, they take care of the family, and they start to ignore others. Now that has an effect even in an economy, because Bibi Netanyahu was the prime minister the second time now, was able to pass on very strong capitalistic economy steps. They couldn't have done it without people being there. People would go to the street and factories. So there's a lot of impact on people when people are sort of get to their home and protect their own. They're in the survival mode. Then there is another effect, which I call polarization, and groups are going against each other. Because when you are in a threat, you're going to have your own inner group. And everybody else, even within the society, will look different. So you have tension within the society. We have a lot of domestic violence since then, men against women. We have some people, some discrimination against refugees, etc. And the worst part, which alarmed me the most, was political extremism, anti-democratic, measures. Now, I'm not supposed to talk about politics in this day and age, but I must say something about that. Because in the Bush administration, after he scared you all that the terrible people will come and hit you, he was able to be elected. And the same thing in Israel. Politicians use it to scare people, so people become more conservative. And since we all are risk aversion, this is Kahneman and Tversky showed us, we're going to stay with the people who we know. And we're going to use anti-democratic. So you had to pass the patriotic law, and we in Israel, in the Knesset, start to have anti-democratic views against Arabs, and this is crazy. What are we turning into? But when you are under threat, that's what happens. And this is my concern. And when I started to realize that this is my concern, I bumped upon a study that was the first study that connected between clinical psychology and politics. This is a study by a group of friends of mine. I did many studies with them. And what they find out that exposure to terrorism resulted, and this is an interesting thing, resulted in some people in some post-traumatic distress. People were worried, okay? And then when they worried and present themselves as having a sense of threat, they oftentimes become more politically extreme, they have anti-democratic views, and they become exclusionists. They exclude others. Now, in Israel, it wasn't against Arab and Palestinian only. It was against other minorities. And I think in the States, it's the same phenomena. And I have a bunch of research since that. Jost and others found out that there was, a negative exclusionist attitude against Muslim and against African Americans, and things got rised up because people were under threat. Now, I was curious, because it got me thinking about another thing, and then I'm leading to the movie that I'm going to show you. Because, this is the majority of people becoming more extreme and more politically to one side. But what about the minority? Now, I got bumped into a very interesting group in Israel. There were two groups particularly that got my interest. First, bereaved Palestinian and Israeli families. You wouldn't believe it, but there is such an organization of parents of Palestinian and Israeli who lost in the conflict the loved one, and they're sitting together talking peace. Well, they're going the other direction. They're not extreme, they're not endful, they're not revengeful, they go the other side. And there is another group, we call it combatant for peace. Those were terrorists who fought the Israelis and militants in the Israeli army who decided, the hell with that. We don't want to fight anymore, we want peace. So I started to ask myself, how come there are few, the minority of people, go the other side? Transcend the hate and violence and move into more peace and reconciliation. And that reminds me, when I was a student, of the Milgram and Zimbardo study. If you recall, the Milgram studies with the shock. By the way, he did it because Hannah Arendt, the philosopher, said there is a banality of evil. She went to the Eichmann trial in Israel, and she saw this bureaucrat who was supposed to be a monster, and she saw just a regular neighbor. This guy killed so many Jews, how is that possible? So she framed the word banality of evil. And so Milgram took this experiment, and he actually, in the beginning, I'll take a little bit more time than I need, so I want to tell you stories. In the beginning, Stanley Milgram in Yale University, really wanted to prove that there is what the psychoanalysts called national character. The question was, why are the German civilized society could have done such horrific thing, not only the Jews, gypsies and others, how could they do such a thing? So at the day, psychoanalysis was in the front, and they said, well, there must be a national character that is stemming from the child rearing. Since German families are very authoritative, when comes a leader, they will all put in the line, and they would do what the leader tells them, like this. And he wanted to do the study in Germany and in the United States, wanting to prove that the Americans are nice and cannot do such things, and the German are like that. All and behold, you all know what happened. When he did the study, you remember, all of you know the, studies of Milgram with the shock, the learner, the teacher and the learner, and, the simulation of shock, da-da-da-dum. Well, he found out when he was asked how many people will give terrible shock to people, and there was lethal shock, mind you, just for $1 that they got. And a guy, yes, in Yale, with a nice code, this guy will tell them, you've got to continue the study. And they will say, no, this person is terrible, he might die. 2/3 of the people continue. So this was incredible. This was one of the most important studies that showed that all of us, and you can ask yourself, would I be like the Nazis? Can I do such evil thing to people? And the answer is obviously no. But the answer is, well, I don't know. 2/3 of us do that, so who does that? And then comes, here's the 2/3 of the people. And look how many people even give 250 volts. This is a Terrible shock. And by the way, if you think that people faked it, Stanley Milgram gave them a little shock to the trainers just to realize that it's a real shock. That's bullshit. It's really a real thing. And still, 65% went all the way up. Now comes Zimbardo. Zimbardo saying, listen, how many people, and he will talk about it in the film, how many people can actually be convinced by one person? We all live in an institution. So the problem is we have rules and norms and teams. And if everybody say, let's kill the Jews, I'm going to kill the Jews. I'm part of the team. I'm part of the thing. So he does the famous Stanford prison experiment where he divides nice, affluent students into guards and into, prisoners, puts them together, and in 5 days they were doing such sadistic things, the guards, that he had to stop the experiment. And by the way, that's why all of you have IRBs and ethics committees. From that day, they stopped to do a human experiment without, subject of the committee, because the people got crazy, and the people who were acting terribly also were distraught after the experiment. He'll talk about it in a second. So my question was, well, that's nice, but who are the people who go the other side? Why in psychology we are so fascinated by evil? How come we are not interested in pro-social behavior? So I happened to be in Stanford University, and I met Zimbardo, and I asked him, listen, don't we have to study the other side of it? There's some minority who didn't go that way. Even in Germany, we have the righteous Gentiles. Some German people, who are not Jewish, saving Jewish people at the risk of their own life and their families. Who are those people? And there were some studies. I don't know if you know Oliner and Oliner, but there were few compared to the other side. Most people were fascinated by evil. Very few people were fascinated by pro-social behavior. And it's strange because you know what? With pro-social behavior, we can go a lot farther. If we understand the processes that allows us all to act like human beings, we can make a big influence.
Night, grass, duck, cloth. The answer is duck. 435 volts.
Continue, please.
I'm not getting no answer.
Please continue. The next word is white.
As big as you look in on them, please?
Not once we've started the experiment.
But what if something's happened and they have an attack or something like that?
The experiment requires that we continue. Go on, please.
Don't the man's health mean anything?
Whether the learner likes it or not, we
But
must...
he might be dead in there.
Before Milgram did his study, he described the procedure to 40 psychiatrists. And he asked them individually what percent of all American citizens would go to the N, which was 450 volts. And on the average, they said only 1% would do it, because they said that's sadistic behavior, and only 1% of Americans, or really any population, are sadistic, meaning psychopathic.
White, cloud, horse, rock, house. Answer, please. The answer is horse. 450 volts.
His result was, on the average, it was 2/3, 65%, 67%. I created a kind of Greek drama in which the issue was, what happens when you put good people in an evil place? Does the goodness of the people dominate and transform the evil place? Or does the power of the evil situation transform and dominate the people? We picked 24, 24, who were the most normal and most healthy, and then we randomly assigned half of them to the role of playing a prisoner and half to be the guard. The study was supposed to go for 2 weeks, but we had to end it in 6 days because it was out of control. That the guards were doing each day ever more cruel, sadistic, brutal things. At the end of 5 days, 5 students, all chosen because they're normal and healthy, were having emotional breakdowns in a simulated prison, in a mock prison. What happens when you put good people in an evil place?
15 שנים אני מטפל באנשים שנחשפו לחוויות טראומטיות גם בצד הישראלי וגם בצד הפלסטיני. ורוב האנשים שאני רואה הופכים לקיצוניים יותר, שונאים את האחר ולא מקבלים אותו.
ערבי טוב, רק שהוא מת.
מיעוט אבל עדיין נמצא בכיוון של פיוס. הניסויים של מילגרם וזימברדו התמקדו ברוב שנהג בצורה לא הומנית. מה שמעניין אותי זה המיעוט. אלה שפעלו בצורה הומנית, מהם ניתן ללמוד הרבה.
How are you? Welcome to America. That's nice. Good to see you.
Good place.
Rony Berger and I have a similar vision, is that research is step one, so social action step two is how do we create programs that can change the way people think and act in the classroom and in the community, based on not our ideas, but we can say, here's the evidence, and therefore we're telling you, here's what to do, here's how to do it, and we have a reasonable probability that it will change your life in a better way. It's never been done. It's a simple idea, but it's never been done.
So anyway, we did this study with 25 Israelis, extremists, 25, transformer from extremism into peaceful reconciliation, 20 Palestinian and 40 ex-gang. Actually, great people, the ex-gang. I love them. I should have put some picture of me going like this with the ex-gang. I dig their culture. It's very funny because when you work with them, they're still into the gang mentality, except they're doing anti-gang prevention. Hey guys, let's go and have some fun. Great. Anyway, so all these subjects were chosen because not only did they, change and moved from violence into non-violence, but also they were proactive in their communities. They belonged to an organization, they did some education, so we wanted some people to be activists, not only changing attitudes, because some of it is really dangerous for those who change. Not only change, you can change privately and stay at home, but when you go into the community where people want you to be violent and all of a sudden you talk to the Israelis, it's a dangerous thing to do. The same with the gangs. If you're known to be the one to take the kids and transform them into not belonging to this group, you might get into big trouble. So we took those and we did very deep interviews looking at family structure, transformational process, etc. We had some questionnaire, and here is some of the results. Well, from a personality perspective, I was surprised that most people who did the transformation were what I would call either born leaders or born rebels. This is a very interesting thing. Is that a dispositional? We don't know. It could be temperamental, that is, we were born this way. But I would surmise that it's possibly the family structure was such that they allowed them to act in a certain way and they contained them. And I'm talking family therapy now. So they were able to act in a way and be accepted. They learned that being an iconoclastic is pretty good. You can go against the stream and be accepted, which is interesting. And then we found some early family pattern. Secure attachment was an important thing. Even for the gang, some of them came from better families. There were some parental figure with whom they attached. They were not completely, no, I'm talking about, Bobby attachment, those concepts. They were really connected. And they were also lived in homes that were pretty pluralistic. I don't know about the gangs, that's hard to gauge, but in the Israeli sense, there were Palestinian families, they were open, they were not so conservative, there were Israelis that were open. So that is nice. And the conclusion, as you'll see further, is pluralism and acceptance within the family produce pro-social people. And also they were exposed to multiculturalism. And apparently multiculturalism, when you expose people to different points of views and to different culture, they fare better. So this is another thing. We also found out that they had strong, they had parents, most of those transformers, both the Israeli, Palestinian, and ex-gang, they had parents who were involved in the community, whether religious involvement, whether helping others, and they had great role models. Although they didn't follow the footsteps in the beginning, that echoed later on, and it helped them sort of go back to their roots, if you wish. What else we find out? Well, we had different people, so it was hard to compare. But one of the things, I'll talk about a few things because we don't have a lot of time. One of the things where we find out that most people who were transformed had incredible amount of trauma. Now this is interesting because most research suggests that if you are a trauma and you're a victim, chances are you will become a perpetrator. Except few people, if they deal well with a trauma, they transform the trauma in what some people call altruism born in suffering. That is to say, they become more conscious. And it's interesting that if you work with people in what we call PTG, post-traumatic growth, not trauma, not PTSD, post-traumatic distress, but post-traumatic growth, we can transform people into moving their negative experience into being compassionate towards the other. And when we look very specifically on how it works, we can see some patterns there, so this will be part of our recommendation. What else did we find out? Well, I don't know if I want to go deep into that. This is a psychological process. They move them. But I want to talk about 5 patterns that we find out, and then I will close with giving you a research of application. Because basically, this I do not only to get publication and tenureship, but actually to develop program in the community. I'm not interested just in understanding the processes. I'm interested in how you take these processes, build community program. So we build few community program and we see some beginning of results, which is really nice. So the patterns that we see in terms of transformation, there are ideological transformation. Those are people who had values. For some reason, they got caught in this negative cycle, sort of did away with their values, but now all of a sudden realize that, and then they have a conflict, a dissonance between their values and what's happening out there, and they change. This is not the gang, by the way. This is more the Israelis in the military and some of the Palestinians. So this is one type. The reason I'm pointing to that is that we need to develop a program for each transformational process. Those who are ideological, you may want to give them some moralistic stuff. And with terrorists, by the way, when we build de-radicalization program around the world, this is what they do. They go and they have religious people, religious Muslim, etc., etc. So this is one type of transformation. The other type of transformation is pragmatic transformation. This is very simple. People are fed up with being chased, with being shot at, with being jailed, and they say, I've had enough of that. But here's the crux of it. You need to give them an alternative. If you are in an inner city and you can make money and you have pride, what we call sometimes the sense of significance. You don't have a sense of significance, you're going to be a gang because everybody would respect you and be afraid of you. Give them another route. Pragmatically, teach them, train them, occupational training, they'll find another thing to be proud of. So those are the pragmatic transformer that are not the ideological transformer. Then we have social transformation. This is more in the Israeli society. This was very interesting. We find out that some people were marginalized because they were from ethnic background. If they get the sense of pride of their marginalization, and there is such a concept, positive marginalization, like female in this country, eventually they use it for power. They turn it around. Or, black power, the African American use it positively. If you take the marginalization and take it positively, you can transform and use it proactively in a positive way. So we found that some of those people, and this is also in the gang community, when they looked back at their roots, some people reported that they have Filipino roots and Aztec roots or Mexican roots, and they got back to talk about where they come from and how they can be proud of being a minority. They fared better. So some of it need to be strengthened, this kind of background stuff for those transformers. And then we have the ones that had trauma, and if we can facilitate them, severe trauma. They were different traumas. They were traumas that related to war and terror. They were shot at, different things. If they worked it out positively, if they changed their perspective, all of a sudden, they can move and shift positions. So, and I believe that you can do some work with those also. And the last thing is the developmental. Those are immature, you know. Oh, everybody is using it, so I'm going to go. And all of a sudden they say, well, gee, I'm 20. I'm not going to be a gangster all my life. I'm not going to be a terrorist all my life. I got to have a family. So those are late bloomers, if you want, and they transform also. So what do? Practical suggestion. You provide children with secure, but this is good for everything. This is bullshit. This is, Okay, you foster pluralism. Pluralism is important. You need to teach people critical thinking. You need to teach people to, I'm rushing fast through that, I'm sorry. You need to teach youth to accept personal responsibilities. Very often we don't teach them to be personally responsible. But this is good for everyone, but certainly it's good for those. We promote positive bystandership. This is interesting. You know, when you see people falling down, how are you going to help them? When you see a kid that is bullied, are you going to stand by and don't do anything because you're afraid? Are you going to take a risk? So how do you teach people? And there are ways to do that. You provide youth with pro-social role models. What we are trying to do in LA, if we are lucky, is getting NBA and rappers to give us small skits of saying, well, I was in the hood, man, and look where I'm at now. They're the small things to give kids that positive. They need to have some models. Those kids who are in the inner city don't have any models, and the models that we have are unrelated to what they're at. We can expose people to different culture, different perspective. All right. I can go on and on and on, but I think some of it you know, so I'll run into the first application. Well, I developed a program that's called Erase Stress Pro-Social. What is Erase Stress Pro-Social? There are two factors. Well, the Erase Stress program is a program that I did in 12 countries, 12 languages. It's after disasters, and what I give them is skills, coping skills to deal with the tension and with the symptoms, and I'll prepare them to deal with further symptomatology. Now that I've done, and I proved it, and I have a lot of data on that. But all of a sudden I wondered, well, why won't we do a combination? So we can do the stress reduction type of things, but we can also do tolerance towards others and pro-social behavior. So we first combined the program, and I did it in Stanford with Zimbardo and others, and we had the first experiment, and this is, so I'll run, we did this is a cute, measurement that I developed. If you want to know how kids relate to others, you say to them, this is an Israeli, this is an Ethiopian, and this is obviously an Arabic. And you ask them, well, you live in this house, this is you, and there's a new street with new empty houses. Where would you put each kid if you have to put them to live around you? So obviously, the Israelis would put this one far away, and this one far away, and this one as close as possible. So this is a cute measurement that we developed. But by and large, what we found out is that when we did this program and applied it in both Palestinian community and in Jewish community, stress were down, and the negative attitude or the stereotypes and the prejudices got down also. So we are very optimistic that if you can do both things and you can combine it, and it's a school-based program, the teacher give it. And we have a home component together. I'm not going to go into that. This is another lecture. Things can change dramatically. So some of the research of the gangs and the thing that we did in Zimbabwe start to get applied. And the more we know of the process of transformation, the more we can get young kids or adults to move in this direction. So I will end with this. All of this is psychology, sociology, but there is also this. And you need to have peace in order to have things change. So thank you very much.